Hey everyone! Typically when making a video, I practice what I'm going to record multiple times beforehand, so I look like I know what I'm doing. However, this time, I thought it'd be fun to show you my initial rigging attempt with all the issues I ran into and how I chose to fix them, and hopefully that's helpful. Let's get to it. Before we rig, select all of your objects, hit Ctrl A, and assign the location. This will set every object's origin to the world origin. It should now be safe to go through and empty the mirror object field from any object with a mirror modifier. Here I'm looking at the Z location for the bottom of her shoes. This is where I'm going to place my rig's base bone. In object mode, hit Shift A to add an armature, single bone. In viewport display, enable in front. Set the Z location to where the bottom of her shoes are. In my case, it's about -1.3148. About, that's an exact quantity. It's possibly a better idea to just move your character and rig up to 0 on the Z axis. I used individual origin, but median point is fine too. In edit mode, scale this bone down. Name your bones as you go. I called this bone origin. Shift D to duplicate this bone. Move it up to her waist. Rotate by -90 in right view. Select this bone's root and extrude down. Select the root again and extrude up. With this new bone selected, hit F3 and search for subdivide. Change the number of cuts to 2. Reposition the top of this last bone at the middle of her neck. Extrude up a neck bone. And a head bone. Name these bones. Select this joint and extrude out a bone to her shoulder. Name this bone. Put a .L at the end of it. This tells Blender that it's a left side bone. There's quite a few naming conventions that denote left and right side. I'll probably throw up some on screen. I'm going to uncheck connected onto this bone's relations. Carefully select this bone's root and make sure it says shoulder.L over here and move it away. Move it forward on the Y axis. Select this bone's tip and extrude it out to her hands. Select this bone, hit F3, and search for subdivide. Move this elbow joint back slightly. If you plan on adding inverse kinematics chains to your rig to make posing easier, it's important to have a slight bend to your character's arm rig. This way Blender knows where the front and back of your joint is, otherwise some strange things can happen. If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry about it at this point. Name these bones, give them a left side indicator. Extrude out a hand bone and name it. Select the tip of the waist bone and extrude up and over to where her hip joint would be. Extrude down to the top of her foot. F3, subdivide this bone. Move the ankle joint back to the middle of her leg. Extrude out some foot bones. Name all these new bones. You can choose to leave or delete this bone. I deleted it, but it'll work either way. Let's make her some finger bones. Extrude out to the joints. Delete this bone. Duplicate these 3 bones and place in each finger. Match up the joints as you go. Position on the Z axis. Select and duplicate this single bone. Place it to become her thumb bones. Subdivide. Use individual origin as the pivot point and scale this bone down. Subdivide this bone to add another joint. Select this joint, hit Shift S, choose cursor to select it. Change the pivot point to 3D cursor. Select and scale this bone to fit the thumb. Name all these finger bones and put a left side indicator on them all. Name any other bones that we've forgotten to name. If you prefer, you can change the bone's display to something easier to see around. Select the knee joint and extrude back a bone. Change this new bone's parent to the leg bone and disable connected. Extrude back the hip bone and change this new bone's parent to the thigh bone. Name our new bones. I'm just going to work on one object at a time. Select and hide a few of her body objects to make it easier to see her legs. I wanted to try something to see if I could alter how automatic weights were assigned, so I moved this bone into her leg about here. I also want her spine to be assigned some of the weight over her legs, which currently it won't. In object mode, select the leg object, tab into edit mode, and extrude up a temporary loop. Add some edge loops. Select the rig, tab into edit mode, choose symmetrize under the armature menu. This will flip any bone labeled with a left or right indicator. In object mode, select the leg object, shift select the armature. Hit Ctrl P and choose with automatic weights. Select the armature, shift select the legs, go into weight painting mode. Under this drop down menu, switch to material to see the colors a little more clearly. I unfortunately forgot to turn off the deform in a couple of bones. Luckily it won't have much impact in this situation. Under this drop down menu, you might find it helpful to switch 0 weights to active. This will color anything the currently selected bone has no control over as black. This is a good start. Tab into edit mode. Delete these upper edge loops. In the Tool tab under Options, you can enable Auto Normalize. This can be helpful if your rigging workflow isn't as chaotic as mine currently is. If you're very systematical and carefully painted in your weights, it'd be a very helpful setting though. Tab into Edit Mode and select everything. Tab back into Weight Paint and enable the Vertex Mask option. This will highlight all selected vertices as white and allow you to choose what parts of the mesh you're actively affecting. Make sure this bone is selected. One way to change vertex weight is under the Vertex Data tab. Slide this bar to the desired weight, in our case 0, and hit Assign. This will remove control of the active bone from any selected vertex. Another helpful tool while weight painting is the Gradient tool. There's quite a few options under the Tool tab. You can click drag to basically paint gradients onto your mesh. This can be pretty helpful. We can select and assign values to groups of vertices at a time. The selected vertex group in this list will correspond with the bone you're changing the weight data for. We obviously don't want our leg bone to deform our leg mesh quite like this. Sometimes diagnosing the problem can be difficult. A tip that might help is when selected on a vertex, you can see a list of all the bones and their weights over that particular vertex. This list is located here under the side end menu. If an area is misbehaving, it probably has something to do with the distribution of weight here. Another way to assign weight is with the brush tool. There are a whole host of blend options. While masking is enabled, you can only affect the masked vertices. You can disable the masking and paint anywhere, or choose a specific location to mask out so that you don't accidentally change something you like, and then you just paint like you would anything. It takes a little getting used to since we can only affect weights at vertices and not in between. This is why it's important to plan out your model's geometry accordingly. I find using gradients to be quite helpful for getting smooth transitions between bones. It looks like things aren't quite working, but the issue is mostly that I forgot to parent my additional hip bone. If I shift select both and rotate, it seems to work pretty well. Select this bone, shift select the thigh bone, hit Ctrl P, and choose Keep Offset. This will parent the little bone to the thigh bone. Do the same on the other side. I changed the position of these bones to line up with the hip joints. Play around with it both ways and see which one you like more. I think I actually prefer the deformation without moving the bone. And the knee is already working quite well. Select all and hit Alt R to reset the bone's position while in pose mode. The upper leg is working pretty good as is, but I messed around with the bone weights for a while to try to make it work even better. The Smooth tool is also handy for weight painting. It can become quite a time-consuming challenge to get things exactly how you want them. The more you practice, the easier it gets. You'll also learn how to tell when something will deform good enough. You don't always have to achieve weight painting perfection. Her legs seem to be working pretty good, so time for the shoes. Select the shoes, shift select the armature, Ctrl P, assign with automatic weights. Select the rig, shift select the shoe, go into weight painting mode. Check how everything deforms. Select all the spike vertices in edit mode, tab into weight paint mode, enable masking. Hit assign with a weight of 0 while selected on the leg bone. Go into edit mode and select these back vertices. Hit assign with masking on. You can't change bones with masking on, so turn it off. Select the other foot bones. I don't want the toe bone to move these details. This can be done several ways, but the easiest is to select these details in edit mode. Assign the toe bone a weight of 0. Assign these details to the foot bone with a weight of 1. This middle detail seems to be controlled by the alternate foot bone somehow. Select the right side foot bone, hit assign with a weight of 0 in edit mode or with masking enabled. That's better. Use the brush tool to subtract some weight from the leg bone. Use the various tools and assign weight how you want. Add some weight on the back of the boot to the foot bone. and that looks pretty good to me. This upper loop on the legs is the only real issue currently. Just kinda brush, smudge, and smooth to get this loop to behave correctly. I spent some time messing around with the leg weights for a while. They're probably good enough as is already, but I can't help myself. It's all just personal preference at this point. Use whichever tool you're most comfortable with until all the weights behave the way you want them to. I'm not used to using auto normalize, so I ran into some issues while trying to figure out how to work with it. It's a brush option, so it only auto normalizes when you're using a brush. Anything assigned by hand or through the weight menu doesn't get auto normalized. Also, if a vertex doesn't have any weight assigned to another bone, it'll automatically be assigned 100% to the current bone whenever auto normalize is on. When all else fails, masking an area and smoothing it seems pretty helpful. But when an area is controlled by multiple bones, it's still pretty tricky. Let's move on to her dress. Before rigging the dress, I want to disable deform on some of the leg and arm bones temporarily. Let's turn off deform on her shoulder bones as well. It's important to remember to re-enable deform on these bones once we finish rigging the dress, but for now, it'll let us assign automatic weights and have less to fix. In object mode, select the dress and shift select the armature. Hit Ctrl P, choose with automatic weights. It should work pretty well by default, but move the armature around and fix anything you don't like. Play around with the armature and make any desired changes. It's now safe to turn back on deform for all the bones. For the most part, everything works pretty well, but I did a little bit of adjusting. I found masking out the neck and using a gradient on the upper part of the body worked pretty well. You generally don't want the top of the neck controlled by any body bones. We need to add some bones to control how the lower part of her dress deforms when we move her legs, so that they won't clip out of the dress like this. In edit mode, select and duplicate her hip bone. Turn off snapping and position this bone at the front of her dress. Duplicate and position at the side. Duplicate again and position near the back. Select the bottom points on each of these bones and move them up. Select the new bones and set the hip bone as parent on each. Also name these new bones. Remember to use a left side indicator. Select these 3 bones and symmetrize under the armature menu. Tab into object mode, select the dress, shift select the rig, and parent with empty groups. This will add the new bones to the vertex groups. You can also add vertex groups with the same name as the new bones if you prefer. Select the rig, shift select the dress, and go into weight paint mode. Enable vertex masking. Set the weight to 1 and paint. Drop the strength if you want to be able to paint various weights in with multiple strokes. We're going for a shape somewhat like this. It'll need a little bit more work to get it to deform correctly. You might need to select the bone on the right side and adjust its control over our left side geometry. Move the bone around and try to smooth out how the mesh moves. Alt-R resets any selected bone's rotation. Move on to the next bone. I pre-rotated the bone, and then weight painted until everything deformed how I wanted. And now on to the backbone. Now we can go back and make sure they all move smoothly together by doing some softening and painting. Let's see how it works. It's perfect. Now on to the coat. The coat has a lot of overlapping layers. I joined all my coat pieces together, but you could also leave them separate. There's pros and cons to both ways. As always, I like to try stuff out when I'm working on a character, so I want to add in a couple extra bones. Disable connected on the elbow and reselect it to move it somewhere back here. Two bone arms oftentimes have a twisting issue at the shoulder and wrist. If you're animating your model in Blender, there's some nifty constraint and driver solutions to these issues. Some solutions involve using multiple bone chains. But if you're exporting a model to be used in another engine, sometimes other solutions are preferable. This is an example of an other solution. I want the tip of the sleeve to be adjustable, so extrude a bone here. Disconnect and move it. Temporarily disable the hands deform checkbox so that they don't get any control over the code. Turn off deform on the head bone, the hips, and all of these added dress bones. Also extrude an elbow bone, disconnect it, and move it back slightly. Set its parent to the forearm. If you want control over the coat fluff, duplicate and snap a bone to the front of her coat. Do the same down here. Set this bone's parent to spine 2. It's important to tailor your rigs to suit your project, and as far as I can tell, Marnie doesn't seem to bend her upper body in game, so some of these bones won't get used very much. Set this bone's parent to the upper spine bone. Remember to name these new bones and have left side indicators. Select all the new bones and symmetrize. I'm going to disable deform on some of the leg bones just to be sure that they don't get any auto weights. Select the coat, shift select the rig, and parent with automatic weights. Select the rig and then the coat, go into weight paint mode, and hopefully it's not too much of a mess. I can see right away that the front flap controls way too much of the coat. We'll fix it later. When you select a vertex, this list will show you all the bones and their relative control. Before we forget, turn back on deform for all the bones besides the base bone and the one sticking out of her back. The arm looks pretty good so far. I decided to reposition this bone. With active element as the pivot point, you can scale by 0 to snap one bone point to another. Select this bone and scale by 0 on the Z axis to flatten it out. Do the same on the X axis. Turn off the coat's visibility and use snapping to move this bone. Grab on the Y axis immediately following the second snap so you don't lose the location of this bone's tip. And do the same here. Turn off snapping and move the sleeve bone as well. This little extra bone lets you smooth out the elbow bend. Maybe it's worth the extra effort, maybe not. A common issue with shoulders is that you usually need to be able to control the upper arm and shoulder area independently, so this bone helps with that. Again, there's other solutions, but I like how these function. In edit mode and face select, you can select entire UV islands with Ctrl L and hide them. If a masking option is enabled, anything hidden will be hidden in weight paint mode as well. I'm going to reposition this bone. And this one. After the repositioning, the two sides are different, so let's delete the right side bones. Select the new bones and symmetrize. I personally don't want this bone to move the undercoat at all, so I'm going to hide, mask, and remove weight from the rest of the coat. Now just smooth stuff out. Keep adjusting all the bone's control using the various weight painting methods. This one vertex point isn't affected by any other bone, so auto normalize will keep it at 100% while using a brush. Any brush tool will just pop it back to 100% red until we add control to a different bone. It took me forever to figure out why this was happening. In edit mode, select a face on the inside of the coat, hit Ctrl L to select all. Hit P, choose by selection to separate this inner piece into its own object. We'll come back and work on this object later. Now it's just a whole lot of adjusting the weight values until everything moves how you want it to. Finally, the solution for this troublesome spot. Just add some control of this vertex to this bone. As with everything, the elbow is pretty good, and it's way easier to leave it as is, but everything usually turns out just slightly better if you work on it for way too long. I want to remove the hand bone's control over the sleeve. Select all and assign a weight to 0. Maybe add a little bit to this area. The arm seems to be working pretty well, but that won't stop me from working on it more. I find areas where stuff overlaps to be a good place to use this vertex weight list. This bone needs a little bit more work. Surprisingly, the coat fluff is easier than it looks to rig. The backside is made entirely of faces, so there are no actual vertices to worry about, just the coat and the front of this fluffy collar thing. So as long as the coat doesn't clip through the front of the collar, you're good. It's tough to decide how you want everything to function. The inner coat bends a bit too much, so I'm going to try to easily get it to follow the outer coat. Select the armature, shift select the inner coat. In weight paint mode, check out how it looks. I think I'm going to copy the data from the outer coat, which is pretty simple. Go into the modifier tab, add a data transfer modifier, drag it up to the top, check vertex data, and enable vertex groups. Use the eyedropper here to select an object to use the vertex weights from. If we click the dress, you can see it changes to follow the dress. Turn on the visibility of the outer coat and use that as the source. If everything looks good, apply this modifier, and now everything works. Time for the hands, which are surprisingly pretty easy by comparison. Select the hand, shift select the rig, hit Ctrl P and choose automatic weights. Select the rig and hand, go into weight paint mode. And I forgot to turn back on the deform checkbox for the hand bones. In object mode, select the rig, go into edit mode, and re-enable deform for all the hand bones. I have a stray bone here, must have happened during my rigging delirium, so I deleted it. Select the hand, shift select the rig, hit Ctrl P, choose with automatic weights. Let's see how it did. This looks pretty good to begin with. I don't want the finger bones to move the hand geometry too much, so give way more control to the main hand bone. Bend the fingers and anything that moves too much, paint out. Add a little more control through here to the hand bone. Smooth out the weights in between. Your fingers do kind of wrinkle when you bend them, so you can get away with not having it all perfectly smooth. Sometimes leaving weight paint mode can help to see if it looks acceptable. I'm pretty happy with that for now. Knowing me, I'll probably spend a couple more hours on it later though, you know. Thank you for watching, I hope you've enjoyed. Next is the grand finale and the conclusion of rigging. Stay safe, I love you all, goodbye!